Have you ever heard the story of Job in the Bible? Well, today I'm going to show you how this story explains Job's journey to loving God unconditionally. What is going on, everyone? We are back for another episode of Prospering with Christ. I hope that you had a wonderful week last week, and I hope that this week will be just as amazing to you as well. So for today's episode, we are doing part 5, which is our very last part of our Job series, where we discuss Job's journey to learning how to love God unconditionally. This episode is picking up at the very end of the book of Job. So in order for you to understand this episode, make sure that you go back and listen to episodes 176, 177, 178, and 179 in order to understand what we're talking about today. So we're going to start reading chapters 33 and 34. Elihu presents his case against Job. Listen to my words, Job. Pay attention to what I have to say. Now that I have begun to speak, let me continue. I speak with all sincerity. I speak the truth. For the Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Answer me if you can. Make your case and take your stand. Look, you and I both belong to God. I too was formed from clay, so you don't need to be afraid of me. I won't come down hard on you. You have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard your very words. You said, I am pure, I am without sin, I am innocent, I have no guilt. God is picking a quarrel with me, and he considers me his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks and watches my every move. But you are wrong, and I will show you why. For God is greater than any human being, so why are you bringing a charge against him? Why say he does not respond to people's complaints? For God speaks again and again, though people do not recognize it. He speaks in dreams and visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on people as they lie in their beds. He whispers in their ears and terrifies them with warnings. He makes them turn from doing wrong. He keeps them from pride. He protects them from the grave, from crossing over the river of death. Or God disciplines people with pain on their sick beds, with ceaseless aching in their bones. They lose their appetite for even the most delicious food. Their flesh wastes away and their bones stick out. They are at death's door. The angels of death wait for them. But if an angel from heaven appears, a special messenger to intercede for a person and declare that he is upright, he will be gracious and say, rescue him from the grave, for I have found a ransom for his life. Then his body will become as healthy as a child's, firm and youthful again. When he prays to God, he will be accepted, and God will receive him with joy and restore him to good standing. He will declare to his friends, I sinned and twisted the truth, but it was not worth it. God rescued me from the grave, and now my life is filled with light. Yes, God does these things again and again for people. He rescues them from the grave so they may enjoy the light of life. Mark this well, Job. Listen to me, for I have more to say. But if you have anything to say, go ahead, speak, for I am anxious to see you justified. But if not, then listen to me. Keep silent, and I will teach you wisdom. Then Elihu said, listen to me, you wise men. Pay attention, you who have knowledge. Job said, the ear tests the words it hears, just as the mouth distinguishes between foods. So let us discern for ourselves what is right. Let us learn together what is good. For Job also said, I am innocent, but God has taken away my rights. I am innocent, but they call me a liar. My suffering is incurable, though I have not sinned. Tell me, has there ever been a man like Job, with his thirst for irrelevant talk? He chooses evil people as companions. He spends his time with the wicked men. He has even said, why waste time trying to please God? Listen to me, you who have understanding. Everyone knows that God doesn't sin. The Almighty can do no wrong. He repays people according to their deeds. He treats people as they deserve. Truly, God will do no wrong. The Almighty will not twist justice. Did someone else put the world in his care? Who set the whole world in place? If God were to take back his spirit and withdraw his breath, all life would cease and humanity would turn again to dust. Now listen to me if you are wise. Pay attention to what I say. Could God govern if he hated justice? Are you going to condemn the Almighty Judge? For he says to the kings, you are wicked, and to nobles, you are unjust. He doesn't care how great a person may be, and he pays no more attention to the rich than to the poor. He made them all. In a moment they die. In the middle of the night they pass away. The mighty are removed without human hand. For God watches how people live. He sees everything they do. No darkness is thick enough to hide the wicked from his eyes. We don't set the time when we will come before God in judgment. He brings the mighty to ruin without asking anyone, and he sets up others in their place. He knows what they do, and in the night he overturns and destroys them. He strikes them down because they are wicked, doing it openly for all to see. For they turned away from following him. They have no respect for any of his ways. They cause the poor to cry out, catching God's attention. He hears the cries of the needy, but if he chooses to remain quiet, who can criticize him? When he hides his face, no one can find him, whether an individual or a nation. He prevents the godless from ruling, so they cannot be a snare to the people. Why don't people say to God, I have sinned, but I will sin no more? Or, I don't know what evil I've done. Tell me, if I've done wrong, I will stop at once. Must God tailor his justice to your demands? But you have rejected him. The choice is yours, not mine. Go ahead, share your wisdom with us. After all, bright people will tell me, and wise people will hear me say, Job speaks out of ignorance. His words lack insight. Job, you deserve the maximum penalty for the wicked way you have talked, for you have added rebellion to your sin. You show no respect, and you speak many angry words against God. When I was studying this book, I had to pause once I got to these chapters where Elihu was talking, because I was really struggling to understand what side he was on. Was he on the side with Job's friends where he was wrong, or was he on the side of God where he was in the right? I did a lot of research. I looked at study guides. I looked at people's opinions, and there were so many people who feel like Elihu was in the right. Elihu was sent by God. And I decided to pray, and I was like, God, you know what? I'm not going to record this episode until you give me like deep revelation that's accurate, because I don't want to misguide people. And what God showed me is that Elihu is a perfect representation of us as Christians. He is a perfect representation of how we are supposed to be on our Christian walk. He is human. So yes, he made some errors, but I want to look deep into him and break down like what things he did that were good and what things he did that are questionable or could be better. One thing that you will notice in chapter 33 is that the way that Elihu approached Job and the way that Elihu was speaking to Job was very nice. See, when we judge and we critique the way that Job's friends were approaching him, they were very rude, they were very condescending, they were very insulting, they just kept saying very hurtful things to him. But when we look at the way that Elihu was speaking to Job, we'll notice that number one, he was nice. Number two, he was sympathetic. And number three, he was understanding. Job's friends will let Job speak, but immediately after he was finished, they would just start yelling at him and throwing insults. They would say things like, how dare you speak about God like that? How dare you think that? How you were clearly evil. Like they're just condemning him for expressing these feelings. But when we look at how Elihu responded, you can tell that he was actually listening to what Job was saying, because he was quoting what Job said and then he responded to it. Not only did he just respond to it, but he was trying to get Job to understand, hey, this is why what you said was wrong. This is why what you said was not accurate. This is why what you said was not a right representation of God. He was correcting, not condemning. And this is something that a lot of us tend to do as Christians. Instead of lovingly correcting somebody, instead of lovingly teaching somebody, instead of lovingly trying to get someone to understand our point of view, trying to get someone to understand why they're wrong, trying to get someone to understand why the mentality they're viewing things from is wrong, we condemn them. We yell at them. We insult them. We talk down to them. We have a demeanor of disgust. And if you go back to episode 172, where we talked about how to love people unconditionally, and I read to you the verses about love exceeding all, you remember that I said the reason why God said that love exceeds all is because love is the only thing that people are going to remember in their experience with you. You can be 100% right, but if what you said and what you did was not backed up by love, then your efforts are going to leave a negative impact on people. Let's say for a moment that Job's friends were right. Let's say for a moment that Job's friends were accurate in the things that they were saying because of the way that they presented their argument, because of the way that they talked about their argument to Job. The way that they presented it is the only thing that Job is going to remember. Everything that they said is going to go in one ear and out the other. He's not going to take anything in. What he's going to do is he's going to get on defense mode. He's going to put a guard up. He's going to try to figure out, how do I defend myself? How do I fight against you? Because your demeanor and your presentation is showing me that you're an enemy. You're not somebody that I should open up to. You're not somebody that I should trust. You're not somebody that I should accept. You're somebody I should fight back against. And so one thing that God really showed me when it came to Elihu is that the way that he presented his argument is the way that we are supposed to represent Christ. I see so many Christians in the world who come across people who aren't doing things that we agree with. And instead of still loving them through that, instead of guiding them, correcting them, teaching them, we tend to judge. We tend to spread hate. We tend to condemn. And what we don't realize, we wonder why these people rebel. We wonder why these people want nothing to do with God. But what we fail to realize is that the way that we presented it, the fact that what we were saying, even though it might be right, even though God does not like the way they are living, even though that is a factual statement, the way that we presented it was not out of love. And so that is the reason why they are rejecting what we are saying. We have to be very careful of how we present things to people, because the way that we present it is what's going to stick with them. And Elihu is a good example of a Christ-like way to present correction. But in part 2 of this series, I went on a whole teaching about how we feel that actions speak louder than words. And I told you, actions and words speak the same amount. We have to view people's actions, and we also have to view people's words. And the reason why it's so easy for us to be manipulated, the reason why it's so easy for us to stay in toxic situations with toxic people, is because they're presenting the right actions. They're showing us with our actions that they love us. But when we listen to the words that are coming out of their mouths, we'll realize the intent behind what they're doing. We'll realize that there's some errors in what they're doing. And the same exact thing applies to Elihu, because when I was researching this story, I came across so many people who truly believe that Elihu was in the right. Elihu was sent by God. Everything Elihu was saying was correct. And the reason why is because they're judging his actions. They're judging his demeanor. They're judging the way that he presented his argument to Job, but they're not judging the things that are coming out of his mouth. They're not examining the things that he's saying to see, is this correct? Is this not correct? Is he right? Is this not right? Does this go along with what Job's friends are saying, or does this not go along with Job's friends? And because they're not judging the intent, they're so focused on his actions and the way that he presented it that it's giving them this false reality that he is correct. For example, in chapter 34, he quoted, in verse 6, he quoted Job, where Job said, I am innocent, but they call me a liar. My suffering is incurable, though I have not sinned. And in verse 7, he says, tell me, has there ever been a man like Job with his thirst for irrelevant talk? We already know that Elihu agrees with Job's friends because in the end of last episode in chapter 32, he told us that he was angry at Job's friends for not being able to prove their point because he agrees with their point. But in this chapter, we're seeing that he feels like because he never seen a situation like Job's, because he never seen a situation where somebody was punished to this extent and they were never evil, they were not innocent, they didn't do anything wrong. He feels like the things that Job is saying is irrelevant. He's basically saying, I don't agree with you because I've never seen this situation happen before. Another example is in chapter 34, verses 36 through 37, where he says, Job, you deserve the maximum penalty for the wicked way you have talked, for you have added rebellion to your sin. You show no respect and you speak many angry words against God. Pay attention to the word he used in verse 37. For you have added rebellion to your sin. In order for you to add something, there already has to be something there. So in Elihu's mind, he believes that Job has sinned. He believed that Job is evil, but he's adding to that evilness by the way that he is speaking about God. Elihu's approach was correct, but the words that are coming out of his mouth shows that he is wrong. And Job is in this vulnerable state. He's in this state where he feels attacked, defeated. He has all his closest friends insulting him. And so for him to be in a position where finally somebody is talking to him like he's a human being, finally somebody is listening to him and able to repeat back to him what he said, finally somebody is talking to him like in a loving way, it would be so easy for him in this vulnerable state to just accept the things that Elihu is saying. And as we continue reading, I'm going to help you understand a lot more why. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to read chapters 35, 36, and 37. Then Elihu said, do you think it is right for you to claim, I am righteous before God? For you also ask, what's in it for me? What's the use of living a righteous life? I will answer you and all your friends too. Look up into the sky and see the clouds high above you. If you sin, how does that affect God? Even if you sin again and again, what effect will it have on him? If you are good, is this some great gift to him? What could you possibly give him? No, your sins affect only people like yourself, and your good deeds also affect only humans. People cry out when they are oppressed. They groan beneath the power of the mighty. Yet they don't ask, where is God, my creator, the one who gives songs in the night? Where is the one who makes us smarter than the animals and wiser than the birds of the sky? And when they cry out, God does not answer because of their pride. But it is wrong to say God doesn't listen, to say the Almighty isn't concerned. You say you can't see him, but he will bring justice if only you will wait. You say he does not respond to sinners with anger and is not greatly concerned about wickedness, but you are talking nonsense, Job. You have spoken like a fool. Elihu continued speaking. Let me go on and I will show you the truth, for I have not finished defending God. I will present profound arguments for the righteousness of my Creator. I am telling you nothing but the truth, for I am a man of great knowledge. God is mighty, but he does not despise anyone. He is mighty in both power and understanding. He does not let the wicked live, but gives justice to the afflicted. He never takes his eyes off the innocent, but he sets them on thrones with kings and exalts them forever. If they are bound in chains and caught up in a web of trouble, he shows them the reason. He shows them their sins of pride. He gets their attention and commands that they turn from evil. If they listen and obey God, they will be blessed with prosperity throughout their lives. All their years will be pleasant, but if they refuse to listen to him, they will cross over the river of death, dying from lack of understanding. For the godless are full of resentment. Even when he punishes them, they refuse to cry out to him for help. They die when they are young, after wasting their lives in immoral living. But by means of their suffering, he rescues those who suffer, for he gets their attention through adversity. God is leading you away from danger, Job, to a place free from distress. He is setting your table with the best food, but you are obsessed with whether the godless will be judged. Don't worry, judgment and justice will be upheld, but watch out, or you may be seduced by wealth. Don't let yourself be bribed into sin. Could all your wealth or all your mighty efforts keep you from distress? Do not long for the cover of night, for that is when people will be destroyed. Be on guard, turn back from evil, for God sent this suffering to keep you from a life of evil. Look, God is all-powerful. Who is a teacher like him? No one can tell him what to do or say to him, "You have done wrong." Instead, glorify his mighty works, singing songs of praise. Everyone has seen these things, though only from a distance. Look, God is greater than we can understand. His years cannot be counted. He draws up the water vapor and then distills it into rain. The rain pours down from the clouds and everyone benefits. Who can understand the spreading of the clouds and the thunder that rolls forth from heaven? See how he spreads the lightning around him and how it lights up the depths of the sea? By these mighty acts, he nourishes the people, giving them food in abundance. He fills his hands with lightning bolts and hurls each at its target. The thunder announces his presence. The storm announces his indignant anger. My heart pounds as I think of this. It trembles within me. Listen carefully to the thunder of God's voice as it rolls from his mouth. It rolls across the heavens, and his lightning flashes in every direction. Then comes the roaring of the thunder, the tremendous voice of his majesty. He does not restrain it when he speaks. God's voice is glorious in the thunder. We can't even imagine the greatness of his power. He directs the snow to fall on the earth and tells the rain to pour down. Then everyone stops working so they can watch his power. The wild animals take cover and stay inside their dens. The stormy wind comes from its chamber, and the driving winds bring the cold. God's breath sends the ice, freezing wide expanses of water. He loads the clouds with moisture, and they flash with his lightning. The clouds churn about at his direction. They do whatever he commands throughout the earth. He makes these things happen either to punish people or to show his unfailing love. Pay attention to this, Job. Stop and consider the wonderful miracles of God. Do you know how God controls the storm and causes the lightning to flash from his clouds? Do you understand how he moves the clouds with wonderful perfection and skill? When you are sweltering in your clothes and the south wind dies down and everything is still, he makes the skies reflect the heat like a bronze mirror. Can you do that? So teach the rest of us what to say to God. We are too ignorant to make our own arguments. Should God be notified that I want to speak? Can people even speak when they are confused? We cannot look at the sun, for it shines brightly in the sky when the wind clears away the clouds. So also, golden splendor comes from the mountain of God. He is clothed in dazzling splendor. We cannot imagine the power of the Almighty, but even though he is just and righteous, he does not destroy us. No wonder people everywhere fear him. All who are wise show him reverence. Throughout these 3 chapters, there was a lot of things that Elihu was absolutely correct about. In fact, I truly believe the only thing that Elihu really was wrong about was the reason why Job was suffering, because he agreed that Job was suffering because he was evil or he did something to sin. In chapter 35, verse 3, he quoted what Job said, where he said, "For you also ask, what's in it for me? What's the use of living a righteous life?" I stated multiple times throughout this series that even though Elihu and Job's friends were wrong, they did have some moments where they made good points. And in this verse, with him saying that Job is questioning what's in it for him, what's the point of living this righteous life, this is exposing that Job had a transactional love for God. Job only wanted to live righteous Job only wanted to do right as long as he was getting something out of it. And through his entire life, he had. Even when we go back to the chapters where he was reminiscing, I think it was chapter 29, where he was reminiscing about how life was before, he said that every time that he experienced a storm, God brought him out. He said that every time he experienced a storm, God was there. So he never experienced a moment where things were really bad, where he had to suffer, where he had to struggle, where he couldn't hear God, where it felt like he wasn't getting something in return for the effort that he was putting out. This verse exposes that Job had an issue with unconditional love. He loved God out of fear. He loved God based on what God was doing for him, but he did not genuinely love God for who God is. And he did not understand the purpose in following God and doing what's right unless he was getting something in return. In chapter 35, verses 14 and maybe 15, he said, "You can't see him, but he will bring justice if only you wait. You say he does not respond to sinners with anger and is not greatly concerned about wickedness. But you are talking nonsense, Job. You have spoken like a fool." This argument was absolutely correct, but it was probably one that was very difficult for Job to hear, because Elihu was telling him, God will bring you justice if you would just take a moment and if you would just wait. But if we go back to chapters 2 and 3, we remember that Job sat there in silence with his friends for 7 days and 7 nights. We remember, if we go back to chapter 29, that Job said that every time he experienced a storm, God was there and God guided him through. He did not ever have a moment where he had to sit and wait for a long time. So in Job's head, he probably felt like, I did wait. I waited 7 days. I sat in silence. I gave God a moment to answer me. I gave God a moment to show up, and he still did not show up for me. And after he sat there for 7 days and 7 nights, that is when he started to complain. That is when all of these things and this unbelief started to come out of his mouth. And a lot of us experience the exact same thing. We've been waiting and waiting and waiting. We've been stepping out on faith. We've been being obedient. We've been giving God opportunities to speak to us. But day by day has been going by, month by month, year by year, and God has still not shown up. And so we start to get into this mentality of believing that God is just never going to show up. We start to get into this mentality of believing that we are just hopeless. But we have to understand that God is not obligated to bring us a breakthrough in our time period. We are supposed to be seeking him to understand his time period. See, if we go back to the story of Job, we remember that he gave praise to God in chapter 1 and chapter 2 after the devil attacked him. We remember that he sat in silence for 7 days and 7 nights and sat there and grieved. And that was an opportunity for God to speak to him, but he didn't do it. And then after that, he spent the rest of his time complaining and arguing with his friends. But not one time did he seek God for understanding. Not one time did he seek God to get clarity on why he's here. Not one time did he ask God, why am I here? Why did you do this? Instead, he's been trying to prove I'm innocent. I did nothing wrong. Instead of asking God, show me the errors of my ways. Because if he would do that, then God would be able to help him understand the reason why this is happening is because you have transactional love for me. I'm trying to teach you how to love me for who I am, not what I give you. And in our seasons, it's great that we've been waiting. It's great that we've been seeking God. It's great that we've been obedient to the things that God has been telling us to do. But how many times have we went to God and we asked him, hey, why am I still here? Instead of feeling hopeless, instead of complaining, instead of getting frustrated that doors are not opening, God, what am I not getting in this season? What are you trying to teach me that I'm not learning? How are you trying to grow me while I'm here? Because if we start asking God those questions and he start exposing those things to us and we can start working on ourselves to become better, then we're going to start seeing doors open for us. And this semi goes along with what Elihu was saying in chapter 36, verses 8 in the first half of verse 9. He says, if they are bound in chains and caught up in a web of trouble, he shows them the reason. He shows them their sins of pride. He's basically saying if they are suffering, if they are in trouble, God is going to show them the reason why this is happening. It may not be a reason that they understand, because in Job's situation, all he was taught is that you have to fear God, you have to obey God, you have to follow all the rules, and you will be okay. If you're not an evil person, if you're not sinning, then God is going to bless you. So because that is all he is taught, he's looking at all of that as the only reason why something like this would happen. And he's telling himself, I didn't do any of those things, so I don't deserve what I am going through. But if he would go to God, God would show him the reason why this is happening. God would show him it's deeper than sinning, it's deeper than doing all the principles that you were taught, it's deeper than just obeying me. It's about your heart posture. And we have to do that very same thing. Another thing that Elihu was correct about was in chapter 36, verses 16 through 17, where he says, God is leading you away from danger, Job, to a place free from distress. He is setting your table with the best food, but you are obsessed with whether the godless will be judged. Don't worry, judgment and justice will be upheld. Throughout this entire series, with us reading the entire book of Job, Job has been complaining and complaining and complaining about evil people and godless people getting away with the things that they are doing. And on one hand, I understand, because I've been there. I've been in seasons where I've been doing everything right and everything wrong has been happening in my life. And I look at people who don't care about God. I look at people who have care about God. I look at people who don't obey God, who are evil, who are operating in all these sins. And I see how life just looks so good for them. And it infuriates me, because I feel like, why is this happening to me? But then they're just getting away with everything. They don't experience any suffering. And it's so easy to get into that mindset, especially when you feel undeserving. It's so easy to get angry that bad things are happening to people who did not deserve it. But the people who look like they deserve it, it looks like they're getting away scot-free. But I want you to understand what Elihu was telling him is that God wants to lead him away. God wants to bless him. God wants to bring him out of this place, but his focus is on the wrong thing. Him focusing on what other people are doing, him focusing on how blessed other people are, him focusing on if justice is being served for evil people is keeping him here, because it's taking his attention away from God. It's taking his attention away from the things that God is trying to show him, the things that God is trying to expose to him in this season, and is putting it on those people. In other words, it's a distraction. Another thing that Elihu was right about was in chapter 37, verse 24, where he said, no wonder people everywhere fear him. All who are wise show him reverence. The type of fear that Elihu was talking about was the fear of respect. And we know that because he mentioned the word reverence, which means honoring, respect, and awe. In chapter 37, he was talking about how miraculous God is, how powerful God is. And he ended it with saying, when people see that, no wonder they fear him. No wonder they respect him. So he was trying to show Job that there's another definition of fear. You've been operating in the fear of being afraid of God. You've been operating in the fear of viewing God as an enemy, viewing God as somebody who wants to harm you, somebody who wants to attack you. You've been explaining God's power as a reason why you should feel hopeless, because you feel like he's going to use that power to attack you even more. But in all actuality, you should be looking at his power, and it should be causing you to deeply respect God. It should be causing you to deeply love God. Elihu was trying to show Job that he had transactional love, and he was trying to correct him and put him on the path to unconditional love. So now we are going to read chapters 38 through 41. And the reason why we're reading so many chapters is because this is the part where God steps in and he begins to question Job. And there's not much that I want to break down from him questioning Job. I only have like a couple points, so we're just going to read it all together in its entirety. Then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind. Who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you know so much, who determined its dimensions and stretched out the surveying line? Who supports its foundations, and who laid its cornerstone as the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? Who kept the sea inside its boundaries as it burst from the womb, and as I clothed it with clouds and wrapped it in thick darkness? For I locked it behind barred gates, limiting its shores. I said, this far and no farther will you come. Here your proud waves must stop. Have you ever commanded the morning to appear and caused the dawn to rise in the east? Have you made daylight spread to the ends of the earth to bring an end to the night's wickedness? As the light approaches, the earth takes shape like clay pressed beneath a seal. It is robbed in brilliant colors. The light disturbs the wicked and stops the arm that is raised in violence. Have you explored the springs from which the sea comes? Have you explored their depths? Do you know where the gates of death are located? Have you seen the gates of utter gloom? Do you realize the extent of the earth? Tell me about it if you know. Where does light come from and where does darkness go? Can you take each to its home? Do you know how to get there? But of course you know all this, for you were born before it was all created, and you are so very experienced. Have you visited the storehouses of the snow or seen the storehouses of hail? I have reserved them as weapons for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war. Where is the path to the source of light? Where is the home of the east wind? Who created a channel for the torrents of rain? Who laid out the path for the lightning? Who makes the rain fall on barren land in a desert where no one lives? Who sends rain to satisfy the parched ground and make the tender grass spring up? Does the rain have a father? Who gives birth to the dew? Who is the mother of the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? For the waters turn to ice as hard as rock, and the surface of the water freezes. Can you direct the movement of the stars, binding the cluster of the Pleiades or loosening the cords of Orion? Can you direct the constellations through the seasons or guide the bear with her cubs across the heavens? Do you know the laws of the universe? Can you use them to regulate the earth? Can you shout to the clouds and make it rain? Can you make lightning appear and cause it to strike as you direct? Who gives intuition to the heart and instinct to the mind? Who is wise enough to count all the clouds? Who can tilt the water jars of heaven when the parched ground is dry and the soil has hardened into clods? Can you stalk prey for a lioness and satisfy the young lion's appetites as they lie in their dens or crouch in the thicket? Who provides food for the ravens when their young cry out to God and wander about in hunger? Do you know when the wild goats give birth? Have you watched as deer are born in the wild? Do you know how many months they carry their young? Are you aware of the time of their delivery? They crouch down to give birth to their young and deliver their offspring. Their young grow up in the open fields, then leave home and never return. Who gives the wild donkey its freedom? Who untied its ropes? I have placed it in the wilderness. Its home is in the wasteland. It hates the noise of the city and has no driver to shout at it. The mountains are its pasture land, where it searches for every blade of grass. Will the wild ox consent to being tamed? Will it spend the night in your stall? Can you hitch a wild ox to a plow? Will it plow a field for you? Given its strength, can you trust it? Can you leave and trust the ox to do your work? Can you rely on it to bring home your grain and deliver it to your threshing floor? The ostrich flaps her wings grandly, but they are no match for the feathers of the stork. She lays her eggs on top of the earth, letting them be warmed in the dust. She doesn't worry that a foot might crush them or a wild animal might destroy them. She is harsh towards her young, as if they were not her own. She doesn't care if they die, for God has deprived her of wisdom. He has given her no understanding. But whenever she jumps up to run, she passes the swiftest horse with its rider. Have you given the horse its strength, or clothed its neck with a flowing mane? Did you give it the ability to leap like a locust? Its majestic snorting is terrifying. It paws the earth and rejoices in its strength when it charges out to battle. It laughs at fear and is unafraid. It does not run from the sword. The arrow rattle against it, and the spear and javelin flash. It paws the ground fiercely and rushes forward into battle when the ram's horn blows. It snorts at the sound of the horn. It senses the battle in the distance. It quivers at the captain's commands and the noise of battle. Is it your wisdom that makes the hawk soar and spread its wings towards the south? Is it at your command that the eagle rises to the heights to make its nest? It lives on the cliffs, making its home on a distant rocky crag. From there it hunts its prey, keeping watch with piercing eyes. Its young gulp down blood. Where there's a carcass, there you'll find it. Then the Lord said to Job, "Do you still want to argue with the Almighty? You are God's critic, but do you have the answers?" Then Job replied to the Lord, "I am nothing. How could I ever find the answers? I will cover my mouth with my hand. I have said too much already. I have nothing more to say." Then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, "Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. Will you discredit my justice and condemn me just to prove you are right? Are you as strong as God? Can you thunder with a voice like his? All right, put on your glory and splendor, your honor and majesty. Give vent to your anger. Let it overflow against the proud. Humiliate the proud with a glance. Walk on the wicked where they stand. Bury them in the dust. Imprison them in the world of the dead. Then even I would praise you, for your own strength would save you. Take a look at Behemoth, which I made just as I made you. It eats grass like an ox. See its powerful loins and the muscles of its belly. Its tail is as strong as a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are knit tightly together. Its bones are tubes of bronze. Its limbs are bars of iron. It is a prime example of God's handiwork, and only its creator can threaten it. The mountains offer it their best food, where all the wild animals play. It lies under the lotus plants, hidden by the reeds in the marsh. The lotus plants give it shade among the willows beside the stream. It is not disturbed by the raging river, not concerned when the swelling Jordan rushes around it. No one can catch it off guard or put a ring in its nose and lead it away. Can you catch Leviathan with a hook or put a noose around its jaw? Can you tie it with a rope through the nose or pierce its jaw with a spike? Will it beg you for mercy or implore you with pity? Will it agree to work for you, to be your slave for life? Can you make it a pet like a bird or give it to your little girls to play with? Will merchants try to buy it, to sell it in their shops? Will its hide be hurt by spears or its head by a harpoon? If you lay a hand on it, you will certainly remember the battle that flows. You won't try that again. No, it is useless to try to capture it. The hunter who attempts it will be knocked down. And since no one dares to disturb it, who then can stand up to me? Who has given me anything that I need to pay back? Everything under heaven is mine. I want to emphasize Leviathan's limbs and its enormous strength and graceful form. Who can strip off its hide? And who can penetrate its double layer of armor? Who could pry open its jaws? For its teeth are terrible. The scales on its back are like rows of shields tightly sealed together. They are so close together that no air can get between them. Each scale sticks tight to the next. They interlock and cannot be penetrated. When it sneezes, it flashes light. Its eyes are like the red of dawn. Lightning leaps from its mouth. Flames of fire flash out. Smoke streams from its nostrils, like steam from a pot heated over burning rushes. Its breath would kill kindle coals, for flames shoot from its mouth. The tremendous strength in Leviathan's neck strikes terror wherever it goes. Its flesh is hard and firm and cannot be penetrated. Its heart is hard as rock, hard as a millstone. When it rises, the mighty are afraid, gripped by terror. No sword can stop it, no spear, dart, or javelin. Iron is nothing but straw to that creature, and bronze is like rotten wood. Arrows cannot make it flee. Stones shot from a sling are like bits of grass. Clubs are like a blade of grass, and it laughs at the swish of javelins. Its belly is covered with scales as sharp as glass. It plows up the ground as it drags through the mud. Leviathan makes the water boil with its commotion. It steers the depths like a pot of ointment. The water glistens in its wake, making the sea look white. Nothing on earth is its equal. No other creature so fearless. Of all the creatures, it is the proudest. It is the king of beasts. So before I get into this, I do want to point out that the end of chapter 37 was Elihu speaking. And then immediately in chapter 38, this is when God stepped in and he started to speak. Because of this, when I was researching, the story of Job, so many people think that Elihu was sent by God and he opened the door for God to come in and speak to Job. But as I was studying this story, God gave me a very interesting revelation on this. Like I said before, Elihu is a great representation of what we are supposed to be as Christians. He came into the situation, he sat down and he actually listened to Job. He listened to what his friends were saying and he listened to what Job was saying. He made a decision. He approached Job in a loving way. He corrected Job in a loving way. He didn't just yell at him. He didn't just insult him, but he actually taught him. And because of the way that he presented the case, it would have been so easy for Job to just say, you know what, you're right, and to accept everything that Elihu was saying. But there would have been a problem with Job accepting every single thing that Elihu said, because Elihu was still wrong about why the situation was happening. Elihu had the mentality of believing that Job did something. Job was evil. Job did sin. And that's the reason why this is happening to him. So if Job would have made the decision to fully accept what Elihu was saying, he still would have been off course of what God was trying to do. This is what caused God to step in and intervene and finally speak, because he did not need Job's friends speaking for him. Although Elihu had good intentions, he did not need Elihu speaking for him. He wanted to directly speak to Job and help him understand what was going on and why it was happening. This story shows us that as Christians, we can only do so much. Our job is to love people. Our job is to correct people. Our job is to comfort people. But at the end of the day, we cannot be the people that they go to for understanding. We have to redirect them to get understanding from God. Because even though Elihu had a lot of good knowledge, even though Elihu was able to pinpoint how Job's love for God was a little transactional, he still was lacking in the area of why this is happening. And so at the end of the day, we have to remember that we can only do so much. And our goal should not be to have people come to us for understanding. Our goal should be to redirect them to God. And that is the reason why God stepped in and he finally started speaking. Now I want to go back to chapter 38, verse 2, where God said, "Who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words?" When I first read that, I was a little confused because I was like, okay, is God angry at Job? But I had to go and I had to look up what the word ignorant means. And it means you lack understanding or awareness. It means that you are uneducated in a certain area. There was a lot of things that Job spoke about out of ignorance. He spoke about how God never gets justice for, the undeserving people and for victims. And he also spoke about his innocence. He maintained his innocence. He maintained that he was blameless, that he never did anything to deserve what he's going through. And like we said before, he's 100% correct, but he's only viewing things from one perspective. He's viewing things from actions instead of attitude. He's viewing things from actions instead of heart posture. He's viewing things from actions instead of mentality. See, he got the action part down. Yes, his actions show that he is undeserving. His actions show that he did not do anything wrong. But when we look at his attitude, when we look at his mentality, when we look at his heart posture, that is what needed to be worked on. And we have to realize that although some things may be questionable, although some things may not feel good, every single thing that God does is for our good. Every single thing that God does is for a purpose. But if we're only focused on one lens, then we're going to start speaking things that is not aligned with what God is trying to do. In chapter 38, verse 3, God said, "Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you and you must answer them." When I first read this, I remember asking, I was like, is God angry at Job? Because it kind of sounds like he's angry, telling him to brace himself like a man because he got some questions and you better answer them. It just sounds very confrontational. But as I was studying this, God revealed to me that what he was doing in this part of the book was not out of anger, it was out of rebuke. God purposely asked Job a series of questions that he knew that Job could not answer. And the reason why is because he wanted Job to finally see, look, the way that you think is completely different than the way that I think. Your wisdom is very limited to my wisdom. Your power is very limited to my power. So instead of just speaking out of ignorance, your ignorance is you viewing things from your limited wisdom, viewing things from your limited understanding, and making a perception of me, making a perception on the situation and speaking from your perception instead of coming to me for understanding, coming to somebody who is more powerful than you, coming to somebody who has better understanding than you, coming to somebody who is more intelligent than you to get understanding on what is happening. I want you to think about it like being in school. Let's say that you are doing a math lesson and you don't understand. You're reading your book, you see them breaking down the steps, but you're still not understanding how to get to the answer. What do? 9 times out of 10, you're going to go to your teacher and you're going to ask for help. After school, you're probably going to hire a tutor and you're going to ask for help. You're going to go to somebody who's an expert in that field. You're going to go to somebody who's smarter than you in that field, and you're going to ask them to help you understand how to solve this problem, help you understand how to make sense of this problem. And so many of us do not do that when it comes to God. God is our teacher. God is more wiser than us. God has more power than us. And we make the mistake of when we encounter a problem, we're trying to look at the resources we already have. We're trying to look at the resources we already have available to us, which is our brain, and make this problem make sense based on what we know, instead of going to God and asking him, hey, how do I do this? Hey, make this make sense to me. Hey, give me understanding of how to get to the answer. I know it's easy to complain, but we have to get out of the mentality of complaining and start going to God for understanding. The next thing that stood out to me was in chapter 40, verse 2. Because like I said, when I first read this, I was like, God, are you angry with Job? Like, why are you talking to him like this? But there was something that he said in verse 2 of chapter 40. He said, do you still want to argue with the Almighty? You are God's critic, but do you have the answer? The Bible says that life and death is in the power of the tongue, and what you say will be what you see. Throughout this entire book, Job spoke multiple times about wanting to argue his case with God. Job spoke multiple times about wanting to debate with God. And this was God's way of showing him there is no arguing with me. There is no debating with me. I am more knowledgeable than you. I have more understanding than you. You cannot argue with me. He wanted to show Job that you cannot critique something that you can't understand. But since you keep speaking that this is what you want to do, I'm going to give you the opportunity to do it, because life and death is in the power of the tongue, and what you say is what you're going to see. Since you want to have a debate with God, this is your one opportunity to debate with God. And in this moment, this is where Job realizes, you'll see in a minute, but in this moment, this is where Job realizes, I can't debate with you. You are too powerful for me. And so when you're going through down seasons, I know it's easy to be angry. I know it's easy to complain. I know it's easy to speak things that don't sound good or speak things that don't really honor God. But we have to be very, very careful of what we say, because what we say has a great impact on the things that we're going to see. But I want to go ahead and read the very last chapter, which is chapter 42. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything, and no one can stop you. You asked, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorance? It is I, and I was talking about things I knew nothing about, things far too wonderful for me. You said, listen, and I will speak. I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. I had only heard about you before, but now I have seen you with my own eyes. I take back everything I said, and I sit in the dust and ashes to show my repentance. After the Lord had finished speaking to Job, he said to Eliphaz the Temanite, I am angry with you and your two friends, for you have not spoken accurately about me, as my servant Job has. So take 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job, and offer a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer on your behalf. I will not treat you as you deserve, for you have not spoken accurately about me, as my servant Job has. So Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite did as the Lord commanded them, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. When Job prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes. In fact, the Lord gave him twice as much as before. Then all his brothers, sisters, and former friends came and feasted with him in his home, and they consoled him and comforted him because of all the trials the Lord had brought against him. And each of them brought him a gift of money and a gold ring. So the Lord blessed Job in the second half of his life even more than in the beginning. For now he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 teams of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. He also gave Job 7 more sons and 3 more daughters. He named his first daughter Jemina, the second Keziah, and the third Kering Hapuch. In all the land, no women were as lovely as the daughters of Job, and their father put them into his will along with their brothers. Job lived 140 years after that, living to see 4 generations of his children and grandchildren. Then he died, an old man who had lived a long, full life. So the first thing that stood out to me reading this chapter was verse 5, where Job said, I had only heard about you before, but now I have seen you with my own eyes. I have been saying throughout this entire series that the only reason that Job was so afraid of God was because of the things that he was taught. He was taught to fear God as in be afraid of him. He was taught that God was evil. He was taught that God punishes people. But now that he has actually seen God, now that he has actually experienced God, it gave him a complete different view of who God is. And this situation needed to happen in order for his viewpoint to change. A lot of us have been taught the very same things that Job was taught. That's why our relationship with God looks like only us asking him for things. Then when we go through storms, then when we go through dark seasons, then when we don't get our way, we turn away, we drift, we start slacking on the things that we used to do. A lot of us are afraid to fully be open to God, to fully tell him the truth, because we've been taught that that is shameful. We've had experiences of people shaming us for being truthful about how we feel. Some of us are even afraid to ask for blessings. Some of us are even afraid to ask for riches and for wealth. Some of us get uncomfortable talking about money because we were taught that money is evil, that money makes you a bad person. There's so many things that we are afraid to approach God about because of what we've been taught growing up about him. And we have even been passing on these teachings to future generations, younger generations, because we can only give people what we have to give. And so if this is all that I know about God, if this is all that I was taught about God, then this is all that I can give you about God. This is all that I can teach you about God. Some of us need to make the decision to relearn who God is. And I know that some of y'all are going to listen to this and you are going to say, this doesn't apply to me. I read my Bible all the time. I fast all the time. I pray every day. I go to church every Sunday. I know God. If that is you, I want you to remember that in chapter 1 of Job, Job was doing all the right things. He was purifying his children. He lived a righteous life. He was doing all the principles that we say that we do today. And yet he still did not know who God was. I want to even give a modern day example. Let's go back to the 2024 election, presidential election that we just had last month. How many Christians that read their Bible, how many Christians that pray and go to church and fast and do all the things that they're supposed to do, that was still using God to validate hate, that was still using God to validate racism, that was still using God to condemn people, still reading their Bible, but then making statements like saying Donald Trump is Jesus reincarnated. Reading their Bible, but then making statements that says that Donald Trump was our man Cyrus. How many Christian people who do all the principles and all the things that you're supposed to do, who still gave a false representation of who God is because deep down they still don't understand God? Please do not make the mistake of thinking that this does not apply to you just because you've been on your Christian walk for years and you do all the things that look good on paper. You will never get to a place where you have arrived. You should always be taking the initiative to learn more about God. And so sometimes when we read our Bible, we are going to have to ask God, give me revelation to understand your character. When we are going through tough situations, we're going to have to ask God, help me to view things from your perspective. And when we mess up, when we misguide people, when we speak out of ignorance, take the initiative that Job took and repent. The next thing that stood out to me was verses 8-9, where basically God corrected Job's friends, told them that they were wrong, and then he told Job to pray for them and he would accept their prayer. And then in verse 10, it says, when Job prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes. This really stood out to me because this is a part of the story that many people don't talk about. When we talk about the story of Job, we always talked about how God restored him, but we don't talk about how forgiveness had to come before that restoration. My question to you is, how many of you are willing to forgive people who hurt you? How many of you are willing to forgive people who you feel don't deserve your forgiveness? Because forgiveness could be the very thing that is blocking you from receiving your breakthrough. Can you imagine if Job would have told God, no, I'm not praying for them. Did you see the way they talked to me? Did you see the way they insulted me? Did you see how they said my children deserve to die? I'm not forgiving them. Then the rest of the book wouldn't have happened. The whole part about God restoring, the whole part about him being blessed with double than what he had before, none of that would have happened if he did not make the decision to forgive. And I know some of you, you're going to be like, well, I don't want to forgive people because I don't want them in my life. And I want you to understand that forgiveness and reconciliation is not the same thing. Forgiveness means I am letting this go. I am not holding on to it. I am showing you mercy and I am releasing it. Reconciliation means coming back together. That's when you make the decision to bring this person back into your life. And if you notice, when we were reading the rest of the book of Job, when we were talking about how Job's life was after that, his friends were not in it. Just because Job made the decision to forgive and made the decision to pray for them does not mean that Job made the decision to keep his friends in his life. The last thing that I want to talk about is verse 11, because I don't want you to get confused by this. It says, then all his brothers, sisters, and former friends came and feasted with him in his home, and they consoled and comforted him because of all the trials that the Lord had brought against him. When I was reading this, I asked God, I was like, why does it say that you brought these trials against Job when you didn't? Because we know from chapters 1 and 2 that the devil brought this upon Job, but God just allowed the devil to do it. But God had me go back and read the entire verse in context, where it says that they comforted him because of all the trials that the Lord brought against him. This is not saying that God brought this onto Job. This is explaining his family's viewpoint on why they came to comfort him, because they feel like the Lord brought this against him. But I wanted to include that because I did not want you to be confused. Like, wait a minute, she said the Lord didn't bring this against him, and this says that it did. This is his family's viewpoint on why they came to comfort him. But in all actuality, the devil brought this against Job, and God allowed it, just like the devil attacks us today and God allows it. But that is all that I have for the book of Job. I really hope that you enjoyed this series. This was my first time doing a series and I was very nervous about it. But I think that is so beautiful to see Job's story, because I read the story so many times, especially every time that I felt myself going through a season of suffering. I've seen so many people read this story and teach on this story, and nobody really had an explanation as to why God allowed Job to suffer. And so I feel very honored that God gave me this revelation of unconditional love. And I really loved seeing it come together, where the devil pointed out that being the reason in chapter 1. And then in the very last chapter, we have Job saying, I've only heard about you before, but now I've seen you with my own eyes. It's his way of saying, I've only heard about you a certain way, but now that I have this experience, I'm viewing things very differently with you. I just feel like it's beautiful how the story came together and how God used this entire experience to draw Job closer to him and allow Job to see who he really is. And if you ever find yourself in a Job season, or even in a season of suffering, maybe you didn't lose everything, but you lost something, I really hope that this series blessed you. And I hope that you go and you read the story of Job for yourself and allow God to give you revelation. Even take the revelation that you got in this episode and this entire series, take it back to God and ask him to give you wisdom on how to apply that to you. But before we go, I do want to give you an action step. So sometime this week, I want you to ask yourself, do you really know who God is? Whether you do or you don't, take some time to learn him and reflect on how you are as a Christian. How do you console people? Are you being a good representation of Christ? How do you respond to obstacles and failures and setbacks? Do some self reflection and take some time to learn God. But that is all that I have for you today. If you enjoyed this series, let me know, because I was debating if I should start doing more series like this or if I should just let this be a one and done situation. But let me know if you enjoyed this series. Also, subscribe so that you get a notification every time a new episode is released. Also, leave a review and let me and others know how you enjoyed the show. And if you want to stay connected, follow me on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Prospering with Christ. Well, that's all I have for you today, and I will see you next week.